Robots, robots, and more robots. The sign of the future. Some robots are designed and are commanded to do particular things, while others have a little bit more freedom of thought and therefore can live like normal humans. Of course, some robots are made to do evil things, and others go haywire and eventually cause chaos to the future world. Then we got mechs, robots piloted by humans to do various tasks that normal humans can't do, like fight other mechs and otherworldly creatures like monsters or aliens. Of course, not every mech is piloted by humans, and sometimes they just do it themselves, because logic. Finally, we got mechs that transform into bigger mechs, like Voltron. And one of them is MagMaxx. No relation to Mad Max, the Road Warrior. Though I think they were aware of this as they put Mad Max on the scoreboard amazingly. MagMaxx is a shoot-'em-up developed by Nichibutsu, also known under their full name Nichibutsu, and published by a variety of arcade distributors, including VideoWare in the US, with this amazing English tagline.
Defeat the heavy metal attack. Transform into mighty robot. MagMaxx. Use red plasma weapon for ultimate power. Transports to underground and back in search of mysterious Dragonian.
Nichibutsu, or Nichibutsu, was a company founded by Suharu Tori in 1970, who would be the only CEO of the company until it folded in 2014, when Tori decided it was time to retire. Since then, all of its assets have been owned by Hamster Corporation, the guys who make the Arcade Archive series for the PS4 and Nintendo Switch. Hey, when will you and Konami release Parodius on there? Just wondering. Oh yeah, and off topic, this comes from a series of trading cards that was made as a promotional tie-in for the Game Boy put into Frosted Flakes cereals in the UK. They made Tony the Tiger friends with fucking Simon Belmont. What the fuck is this shit? Unlike most other companies like Taito and Namco, who began doing different things before getting into the arcade business, Nichibutsu actually did it from the very beginning. Of course, mostly by selling arcade machines, though they would manufacture their own in 1975. One of the very first games they ever made was, of course, a clone of Breakout, called Table Attacker, which is just the Breakout clone. Also, this game is lost to me, so therefore I cannot show any footage of it. Yep. It's one of those games. The company later had business alliances with Namco and Taito to make clones of their own games. Moon Alien, which is a copy collection which later got them into a bit of legal trouble because they made more than what they were supposed to. And Is that Darth Vader? They really got away with this. I cannot believe that. Not only is this a clone of Space Invaders, but it also has artwork from freaking Star Wars. I'm surprised that they actually got away with that. In 1980, Nichibutsu would release their first major hit, Mooncruster, which is essentially a shoot-'em-up with a bit of a twist. Well, kinda. After going through a few waves of enemies, you are able to dock with 2 different ships to make one big ship. All it does is just give you extra firing power, but it's still pretty cool for 1980. Later in 1985, they would release a sequel to the game called Terracrusta, which is essentially Mooncrusta but even better, with vertical scrolling, more ships to dock, and there's even a button where you can separate the docked part to make more firepower. Plus, if you collect all 5, you turn into a flaming phoenix, which essentially makes you invincible for a couple of seconds, then reverts back to normal. In 2021, nearly 35 years after the release of Terracrusta, Hamster Corporation would release Soul Cresta, which I haven't tried yet, but it looks pretty good from the trailers I've seen. Plus, it has music from fucking Yuzo Koshiro, the same guy who did soundtracks for Streets of Rage, Slap Fighter MD, Beyond Oasis, and Shenmue. Yup, that's some good shit. But one of their most famous games is a game called Crazy Climber, a game where a green-suited man with orange hair climbs through the Nichibutsu building. Why? because, I don't know. The game became a hit in both Japan and the US, where it was distributed by Taito with this nice little arcade flyer. What made the game so unique at the time was the fact that it had two joysticks. One moves to the left hand, while the other moves the right one. So you couldn't just use one joystick and go through the whole game with that. You have to use two, and you have to do it in a rhythmic fashion, which feels like you're actually toppling through a tower with just two hands and legs. This control layout would go on to be used in a little game called Robotron 2084, released by Williams in 1982. And the reason why I say this is Nihon Busan's most popular game is because there are so many re-releases and sequels of this game, it's absolutely insane. They even made a board game based off of it, and they called it the Crazy Building this time instead of the Nichibutsu headquarters. And almost all of that stuff was exclusive to Japan. All we got internationally was an Atari 2600 port. They really ported this game on a console with only one joystick. They would eventually make a few other games like Cosmo Police Galavan, which is a game that I'm actually going to review sometime in the future. Booby Kids, yes, that's the actual name of the game, and Rugrats, no relation.
Stu, what are you doing?
Making chocolate pudding.
It's 4 o'clock in the morning. Why on earth are you making chocolate pudding?
Because I've lost control of my life.
You motherfucker.
Oh my god, it's Drew Pickles.
No shit, you bastard.
Calm down, dude. Why are you so mad?
I'm here to tell you to stop blabbering about the other Nichibutsu video games and get on to the fucking review, you furball ass loser of a bitch.
Jesus Christ, dude, I'm getting to the review, don't worry.
You better. Or else I'm going to send my fucking gang to beat the fucking shit out of you.
You're a dick. Even though the story in this game isn't really necessary, the fact that it even has one at all is pretty crazy. But it's really, really simple, and isn't really worth talking about all that much. The story goes is that Earth has been colonized by a bunch of aliens using a series of mechanical monsters being operated by a three-headed computer named Babylon. However, the humans created a transformable robot called MagMaxx with the code name Robo-Centurion and must find the parts to destroy Babylon and save the world from moral destruction. Yeah, pretty simple stuff. When you answer the coin and begin the game, you get this nice little cutscene where MagMaxx gets taken to the surface and begin his mission. Once you take control, you'll notice how nice the game looks, especially what they did to the backgrounds. The game has a pseudo 3D type scaling to it, which makes the graphics pop out a lot more than most other shoot 'em ups at the time. I tried to find information about how it's done, but however I didn't really get much results. It's probably hardware related. You also notice the little hatchets, which will teleport you to the underground of the game. It may not look as nice as the overground, it still looks pretty nice, and the fact that it has a feature at all is pretty cool. You can also shoot these stalactites from the ceiling to make it fall down onto enemies, and you can get bonus points for it. This also happens to you and you lose a part. Speaking about parts, there are 3 parts to get throughout the entire game, and each have their own ability. The torso and head, which is required to get the cannon and adds extra firepower to your ship. Legs, which gives you a little bit of firepower, plus also makes you a little bit bigger, and also looks really funny when MagMaxx wears it without the torso. And cannon, which shoots out a mini beam that destroys indestructible objects, as well as shoot fireballs underground. All these add extra hit points for Maxi Boy, to make which totals to 3 before you go down. Fuse it together, and you get the ultimate Robo-Centurion. There's actually quite a bit of enemy variation in this game, including ones that just stand still, some that move on the screen a couple of times, and ones where you can shoot, which adds projectiles that will contact you and even other enemies. These aren't enemies, but rather obstacles that are indestructible unless you got the cannon. Near the end of the second and fourth sections of the game, you get to fight Babylon, and it's pretty easy. Just avoid its slow-moving projectiles and shoot at its head. That's it. The only difference between these two is that there are more projectiles and they're a bit faster in the fourth section compared to the second section. But still really easy to beat. Once you go through the fourth section and defeat Babylon, in good old arcade fashion, it loops to the very beginning. With the only difference being that it's harder. It'll go like this until you either die or just quit the game and find another arcade game to play. That's just a simple overview of the game. Now it's time for critiquing. The first thing you might notice is that MagMax is somewhat slow. But you'll go like, hey, doesn't the legs make you a bit... It doesn't. Look, I kinda get it. This is more of a bare-bones shooter than most other games. But seriously, the amount of projectiles that some of the enemies can shoot is fucking insane. And with the amount of enemies that can literally shoot at you at multiple directions, it can be a pretty big pain in the ass trying to avoid them. This can also be a pretty big problem if you're fully docked up. Due to how big MagMax can be with the legs, it makes you a much bigger target to other enemies, and therefore trying to play it without getting damaged is a pretty big problem, to put it lightly. Some of the enemies are also pretty annoying because most of them will just loop around you and shoot at you until you either destroy them or they eventually just leave the screen. Thankfully, it's not that big of a deal because most of them don't really appear in the game often, or at least at the first loop, so it's not that bad, but can be a bit frustrating for some trying to go for a perfect run. Also, the third section as a whole can go fuck itself.
Serious. Gen Z skibbities of Reddit. Why are we in a review video with shitty Subway Surfers gameplay videos alongside it? And how did this happen? I went to my grandma's funeral yesterday, and after I went home, I saw something outside of my window. It was James the cat. I've had sightings of this man for years now, and I finally spotted him. He isn't even intimidating. He's just staring with his stupid ass smile and everything. I opened the door and he entered my house and said hello. He walked all the way to my kitchen, stole one of my fucking honey jars, and then told me to sit down as he ate the entire fucking thing and just left. This fucker ruined my entire life and I want him dead. I also just did a number 3 in the bathroom. Someone call Amber Clams.
That could just be a skill issue that I have, I don't know. The only problem that I have with this game is it just me, or do I think that the underground sections are a little bit harder than the overground ones in later stages? Like, I mean, the first 2 sections weren't that bad, but here comes the third section. It's filled with tons of bullshit enemies, and these fucking things. Ooh, I really fucking hate them. And the fourth section, well... I think that one's probably more of a skill issue. So, what do I think about this game? Well, aside from the issues that I mentioned, this game is still quite fun to play. From its unique docking system and impressive graphics, to the enemy designs and patterns, even if a bit annoying, makes this game quite fun to play. Even if it hasn't aged as well as most other shooters from its time, it's definitely worth a look. What's that? Let me check. Hello, you called the Dadork 400. How may I help you? Oh, you want me to look at the ports? Come on, they're not really that interesting. Fine, I'll do them. In 1987, Ocean Software, under its Imagine division, released versions of MagMaxx for the Commodore 64, Amstrad CPC, and the ZX Spectrum. Around that same time, the Nintendo Famicom version was released in Japan, and then later released in the US the following year. First, the home computer ports. Due to obvious reasons, all three of these versions are severely cut down compared to the arcade original. Compared to other ports that Imagine did at this time, it's not very good. Mostly due to the fact that all three versions were rushed in some way, and as a result, there are quite a bit of problems with these versions. We're going to start with the one that is by far the better of the three. The ZX Spectrum is by far the most polished and most complete version of this game, but that isn't saying much. This and the Amstrad version were programmed by Canvas Software, who are most infamous for programming the notoriously bad Highlander computer game. Say what you want about Highlander, but everyone can agree that it didn't deserve a game that is this bad. It is unfair, controls like crap, it is totally broken. Please, do not play it. It is that bad. Thankfully, this game doesn't come close to being as bad as that, but is still not a very good port. First off, the controls are a little bit stiff, but it's not that bad. Though, if you decide to play on a keyboard, instead of using QAOP, the game uses QAKM, which isn't that bad, though it can be a bit uncomfortable if not disorienting if you use the QAOP controls. Another problem is that you cannot redefine them. Yep, it's one of those games. The enemy placement is kinda lame and sometimes can be a bit frustrating. Though, compared to the Amstrad version, it's not that big of a problem. But what is a problem is the projectiles. Of course, being a Spectrum game, it only uses like 4 colors, and only 2 for the main game. Whatever color, like green, yellow, blue, gray, and black. This can be a big problem, as projectiles are usually the same color as the backgrounds. So you'll die mysteriously unless you know that it's there. Lastly, the game kind of feels a bit budgety. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely not the worst game out there, but compared to Imagine's other games on the Spectrum, especially compared to Terra Cresta, it's not that great. But there's worse. The Amstrad CPC version is where things get really bad. The enemy placements are absolute fucking shit. Like, I'm talking about enemies being blocked by barriers, but they still have enough time to shoot at you. This doesn't help because the collision detection is just plain awful. You have to be dead center in order to defeat the enemies, because trying to do it from the left or the right is not an option. Your bullets just go straight through them. Yet you got a big hitbox, so therefore that's also a big fucking problem. I've spent minutes trying to get through this first section. It is that bad. Like, how do you mess up level design this badly? Thankfully, the underground isn't nearly as bad as the overground, though that isn't saying much because the screen is just pitiful. It feels like the game is squished. Even for Amstrad standards, that's pretty terrible. Oh, and you're also still dealing with really bad collision detection too. The only thing that is going for this version is its amazing tonal theme. than that, stay clear from this horrible part. Out of all of them, the C64 version is the worst. At least from my standpoint. Though honestly, in comparison to the Amstrad CPC version, you can kind of understand why this one was so bad. You see, Canvas already made a version of this game, but were let go, likely due to the fact of the terrible reception of Highlander, though I don't know why. Paul Hughes programmed this version of the game within a week. And the fact that he was able to do it within such a short amount of time is always an impressive feat. Though, as always, what's the point if the game is not going to be very good? Though, not all games that are rushed end up like that. Though those are very few and far between, and MagMax is unfortunately not one of those. In fact, MagMax for Commodore 64 is totally broken. Filled with bugs and glitches, multiple crashes, and is just completely awful. But honestly, you couldn't really blame the programmers for it being this bad. It's just that they didn't have enough time. And that's why MagMax for C64 isn't exactly the worst version of this game. Because deep inside, it could have been an okay port. Not great, but okay. The graphics, while not looking like the arcade version at all, look pretty good. The scrolling is really nice. And surprisingly, even though it's quite difficult, you can actually beat the game. However, it's incredibly difficult to do so. You see, as soon as Babylon comes, you zip immediately to whatever side of the screen that the game randomly picks. And its projectiles are incredibly fast and pretty unfair. But it is possible. All you need to do is just go near Babylon's face and just shoot the two heads. Yes, there are two heads instead of three. Overall, MagMax for C64 is rather buggy. However, there are cracks of this game which fix the game's problems. And if you have one of those, it's not that bad. Not great, but not terrible either. Honestly, if I had to choose between that and the Amstrad version, I would honestly go for the C64 version. Because at least they tried. Somewhat. Also, rave party! And last but not least, the best one of them all, the console port. The version that was released on the NES. Unlike Nichibutsu's other games, which contains quite a bit of differences, from like adding new levels or making the game completely different from the arcade version, MagMax is just a straight up home port of the arcade version. Like the home computer versions, MagMax has been severely cut down for the Nintendo Famicom compared to the original arcade. But the scrolling is still pretty good and the graphics look pretty much on par with the original arcade. It seems like they did a pretty good job redrawing all the graphics for this port. The only major difference is that the cannon's blue for some reason when you don't pick it up, but once you do it goes to its normal color. Very strange. Most of the enemies are here, including the ones that shoot projectiles that destroy other enemies. Plus, they act exactly like the original arcade version, except for Babylon, because, well... I forgot to mention while I was making this video that Babylon actually has two different forms, depending on which section you're in. Granted, it's still the same pathetic boss, but it's pretty neat that they actually did that too. Babylon is downright pathetic in the NES version. All he does is shoot his projectiles and just stand there. That's it. He's incredibly easy to defeat. In fact, the enemy placement is a little bit different when compared to the original version because it feels a bit easier. In fact, I feel that the entire game is like that. Granted, it's likely due to limitations of the Nintendo hardware at the time, but still. Plus, MagMax actually moves a little bit faster in this game compared to the original arcade, which is definitely an improvement. Though I don't know if it's actually intentional or not. But still really nice that they had it there. Another thing which I don't think is intentional is that once you get through the fourth section of the game and fight Babylon for the final time, the background turns black. Granted, this doesn't make it quite cool because it feels like you shut down the most of the systems of Babylon. All you need is just fight the main computer itself and you're done. After that, you loop back to the beginning. This is one of Nihon Busan's very first Nintendo Famicom games, and for their first outing, it's actually not that bad. Of course, this and their second game, Saracross, would be the only games which are just arcade versions, because they either have noticeable differences, extra levels, or completely different games. It kinda makes MagMax for the NES kinda bland when compared to those, but as a first outing for the Nintendo Famicom, it's pretty good. Plus, this game is also pretty cheap online, as you can get it for like $7 to $8, which is a great deal for a fairly decent arcade shooter for the NES. So, yeah, it's a pretty good port. Now, I can finally end this video for good. Well, that was a pretty long one. I wonder what should I play next. And no, I'm not playing their Mahjong hentai games, which, as crazy as it sounds, are real, and it's just strip poker, but with Mahjong instead of poker. What should I play next?